Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in this chat today. I am really pleased to introduce Mark Dale Johnston. He is a distinguished alumnus of our university. And please, I'm going to try to get my facts correct here, Mark, but do correct me if I get anything wrong. He graduated in 2020 with MSc in management, and he
21, but okay.
Sorry?
Graduate 21, but
21. He's the first fact wrong. And he received a distinction, graduated with a distinction. He is now working at logistics manager at Novo Nordisk. And today he's going to talk to us about why success in the labor market not only depends on the grades, but also the application of theories and concept into practice. Now, without any further ado, I will hand over to you, Mark. So when you're ready, if you have slides, you think you can share them.
Perfect.
And everybody, while Mark doing this, feel free to put your questions, observations, comments in the chat or the Q&A, and after Mark's discussion, we can spend some time asking these questions. Thank you. Over to you, Mark.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Apart from the first thing, you were spot on. Spot on. So hi everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. So I will share my slides here in a moment, but really just to set the stage and really wait a bit to introduce myself a bit more. Let me just start by asking you rhetorically, why do you think that we as experienced professionals or newly graduates have the tendency to forget what we've learned? Put it in another phrase, that why is it that some of our future colleagues or colleagues in itself have the tendency to climb the corporate ladder a bit quicker than others? Without further ado, let me just share my presentation. So over the next 30 minutes, I will, as I was about to share with Crystal when she asked whether I was ready a few days beforehand, what I literally would say is liquid gold for the new graduates entering the job market. And you might be thinking, but Mark, what will we get out of this as we're done off today? So here in the coming slides, I will share with you what I've learned over the last decade from some of the greatest and biggest companies in the logistics sector and some of the biggest companies in the pharmaceutical sector as well. In itself, there are a lot of fruitful thinking to take from this. So the individual that sees this presentation today, there are mainly three things that I hope that you will get out of this afterwards. After this presentation, you should have a better capability of understanding the importance of bridging the academic theory with practical application, as well also apply structured thinking framework to your problems that you encounter, and most importantly, to transform knowledge into capability. To put it a bit more brief, essentially to bring academic theory into practice, to structure your problem solving, and essentially to stand out as a top talent in your field. Before going any further on this, just to give you an idea of the trajectory that we will go through this presentation today. So first off, I will just introduce me a bit more thorough than Husni, just to give you an idea who I am as an individual, but also as a professional, because this will lead to the traits that really characterize me. Then we go to the main question of today, and the three proper observations that I've seen over the last 10 years, where what people typically do, and as well also the three remedies that I see as quite vital to do something about these three observations. Lastly, we will take out have a look at the key takeaways, and then we will end with a Q&A session at the end. But let's start a bit with me. So who am I? As Husni said, my name is Mark Dale Johnston. I'm 31 years of age. I live in Copenhagen, but I actually lived in Oxford between 2020 to 21. Despite being the years of COVID, and socially it was a truly difficult area, I would say academically, it was fantastic. If I could do it again, I would have done it again, despite the COVID situation. But my name is Mark Dale Johnston. I'm a logistics manager at Novo Nordisk, and I have the responsibility of managing our external warehouses that supports our growth for our production facilities. So it is both warehouses and the logistics for the material going into the production, as well as the finished products going out to our patients. Over the last 10 years, I've been at the DSV, I've been at Kuehne Nagel, and been at a small family organization called Christian Olsen. So as we say in Denmark, I've been at both sides of the table, both been at the service provider, but as well also as the customer. And how my educational background is a bit different compared to a lot of others is that I've not taken what at least in Denmark, and I presume in the UK as well, we talk about as a bachelor degree. Instead, I chose the path of taking a graduate diploma degree instead in supply chain management. And how this is really different is that instead of that you study for 3 years, then you actually studied it part-time next to a full-time job. So that really forces you and give you the opportunity to that each time that you have a session or you have a course to apply it in practice immediately. So after my 4 years, when I graduated from the diploma degree, I moved to Oxford for a year to complete my master's degree at Brooks, which I fortunately completed in 21. And why I'm saying this with this balance here between academia and practice, I think this is really the coherence that you will see throughout the whole presentation, but as well, it also culminated in a project that I'm truly proud of. Because after I graduated from Brooks, I could not stop thinking about some of the theories that I had throughout this year, whether this is still relevant in the real world as we see today. And a good example of that, and I've never had an idea like this before, it was that I could not understand why the famous Michael Porter kept not having the procurement element in his value chain, not as a primary activity. And with that mindset of curiosity, it really led to my independent research that is called Time for Revitalization of the value chain management. And I think in essence, I'm not really starting to have a sales pitch towards that article right now, but what it really ends with is actually encouraging the younger generation today to be critical towards the frameworks that they are presented to see, okay, it could be that this model or framework has been developed back in 1985, but how does it really fit into the real world as of today, in 2025, for instance? So if you ask my friends, if you ask my wife, if you ask my colleagues, how would you characterize Mark? And I think it's quite simply in 3 matters. So I'm curious and eager to learn. I like to think outside the box, and I like to challenge the status quo. I always believe that we as individuals, as well process-wise, corporate-wise, we can become better. So the main question, why are we actually here today? So as I started this presentation with this rhetorical question, why do we as professionals forget to apply what we've already learned? And to me, I think this question is so relevant to continuously bring into play, not only as a newly graduate, as I said in the beginning, but also as an experienced professional. And the reason for this is that some of the 3 observations that I've largely paid attention to over the last 10 years has been that I've seen the tendency to show the knowledge name drop. And I will come more into this in a moment. Then the second observation from my perspective is the forgotten frameworks. And the last one is the cost of forgetting. So the knowledge name drop, what is it really about? I think as a new individual into a corporation or a newly graduate from a university, you really want to prove yourself when you get that new job. You want to show the employer that you know everything. you can remember the whole curriculum. But actually, it's actually more relevant, even regardless whether you know the full curriculum or not. It's more important for yourself as well as the employer as well to remember that more focus on using your knowledge where it's relevant. I typically like to call it the name drop. And a good example of that was that I was taking a part in a job interview at Novo Nordisk a few years ago, where we had to get a new colleague into our team. And this individual really wanted the job. Unfortunately, the individual didn't get it. However, what I really experienced in that interview was that the person really wanted to show that the individual knew about supply chain management, key account management, started to drop all of these important concepts, but also large concepts which is like an umbrella with so many sub-tasks under or sub-elements under it. So remember, whether it's a job interview or it's just a simple question, I know that you potentially, especially in the start of your career, you are eager to show what you can. Show them the relevance of the knowledge instead, because otherwise you actually give the impression, or that's at least what I got at that job interview, does the other person actually understand my question, since that individual is talking from east to south about that area? The next thing, the forgotten frameworks. Typically today, when we are in the real corporate world, the speed is up here. The pace can be so fast that we start neglecting the structural thinking that we've learned from universities, the frameworks to understand what is actually the problem or how to approach a problem. At Brooks, we learned this notion called group thinking, and I'm not quite sure whether you've heard about it before, but what it's really about is that you reflectively and outwardly would think that a group thinking more alike would be more efficient. But what it really leads up to is that you stop being critical towards others' ideas because you think the same. So even though that you start at a new company, you really want to fit in, you also have to remember that you potentially been hired because you have something different that the team doesn't have today. So even though that you want to fit in from a social perspective, it does not have to stop you from bringing in your structural frameworks that you've learned from the university or from another corporate place that you've been before. Because if you think about it, each year, I can assure you that each large corporation today, they have a massive budget for consultants to make chaos sound logic. So why don't we just bring it on our own and already there start to save money? Question mark. The last thing, the cost of forgetting. Now, I touched a bit upon the speed before, that there is a tendency to prioritize the speed over the structure frameworks. And you could think that it is because that we don't have time to stop up. But by not stopping up sometimes, it creates inefficiency. It creates rework. And at the end of the day, it leads to slower decision making. So by having the courage, whether you are experienced or you are a new graduate, it's the first job after university, believe in yourself and saying, hey, I know that this is the problem, but are we really looking at the problem? And I think this really leads to the next 3 remedies that I really want you to pay attention to, because I use it a lot today. I pitch it a lot at Novo Nordisk today. And when I speak monthly with my mentor, who is a partner at one of the top consultancy firms here in Copenhagen, that he's indirectly doing it as well. So let's start to play some frameworks and see if we can solve these observations that we've just been through. Because as I say here, then without frameworks, we just start to solve the problem again and again and again. So the 3 remedies that I like to bring to you today, that you already from the next meeting, the next session, the next private problem that you encounter, you can actually use these whether you want it or not. So the first thing is really structure the problem. Really show yourself what is actually a path towards this? Another thing is also understand the problem, clarify the question. What are we actually supposed to do? And lastly, a question can be answered in various ways, but sometimes it's also about prioritizing with impact what really makes sense in this specific scenario. So hopefully we don't lose so many participants here when I mention the course research methods. I know it doesn't always sound as the most sexy subject. I know that. But I can just see that the ones bringing in research methods or at least the methodological way of thinking into practice are the ones that really climb the corporate ladder, or at least get the fun task and could bring on and help to bring on that cultural mindset in one's department as well. So both in Copenhagen, but indeed also at Brooks, when we had the course research methods, we were introduced to Saunders et al. I think the book was called Research Methods for Business Students. And in that book, now I'll take a snippet from my dissertation back then. It shows this framework here called the research onion. And as all of you know, methodology can be quite tricky. It can be a unclear world where you have to put your thoughts down into a paper. But if you think about it, if you can show your trajectory more clear to yourself, it's also easier to get others on board. So I'm not just saying that this framework here specifically that you can use this after, but it's to start the way of thinking that even though that you have a way to solve a problem that are sent towards you, try to stop up and say, okay, the way that you actually want to solve it, try to write that trajectory and the path down, because here you can actually be clear, does this really make sense? And you would actually be surprised that when you are to present it to others, that they are more on board as well. What I will show you now, I think my wife I'm driving her nuts by always mentioning this framework, but it just proves you how important really is. It has been to my career, and it has really been, culminating to where I'm at today. So I'm not quite sure how many of you have seen the movie called Moneyball with Brad Pitt, and I've never thought that I would do a presentation with a picture of Brad Pitt in it, but here we are. In 2011, the movie Moneyball came out, and Brad Pitt has the head role as Billy in this movie. It's about baseball. Normally, I'm not a baseball fan, but what I really like about this is that in this scene here in the beginning of the movie, he's trying together with his recruitment managers to find replacement for the 3 star players that has just been moved to another team. Then he stops up and saying, "Hey, guys, I think we cannot just replace them. We're not looking at the right problem." Where the recruiters kept saying, "But we just have to replace them." But as he said, that when we look at the baseball league in general, we have the teams with the highest budget, and then we have shit, and then we have his team. But it's just simplifying that regardless how much you really want to solve that problem, this is not really the problem that we are looking at. And this framework in general, I like to compare it with Barbara Minto's framework. And so those of you who haven't heard about Barbara Minto before, she was a previous McKinsey consultant who wrote the book called the Pyramid Principle. And in that book, she, in between the lines, actually created a framework that is called the SCQA model. I use it every day. I use it towards executive management because it really helps to simplify what is really the issue here. Just to bring you on board, how it really starts is that you imagine that you are a manager or responsible for a certain area. You hear from some that this is the issue, to hear for others that this is the issue. You really have the classical conflict of interest. So instead of just listening to one or the other, start to understand the situation first. What is actually going on? What has happened over the years? How are we performing? How is our revenue? How is our bottom line? And then we go to the C, the complication. Is there actually something that has changed over the last months, last year, last period, that has changed the situation where we actually are today? Because by that, you actually have your question. You have your question to your complication, and you know this is what we are to solve. I use this as well in my dissertation and thesis to find my proper problem statement for that research company that I worked with back then. And in essence, this is exactly what consultants do today, because by bringing the audience on that journey, you actually help making chaos sound logical. Then I also said in the beginning that there could be more directions to answer a question. In this case as well, if I just have to finish this talk with SCQA model to your dissertation or thesis today, then you can compare it a bit to that the question is your problem statement, and the conclusion that you end up with at the end of your dissertation should actually be your answer to that question. But just to go to the next remedy, which is about the answers, that you can have different trajectories, the path to answer a certain question. But it isn't always that the individual direction is the way that you should go towards. And here I have to bring a framework as well that I brought into my dissertation. Now this is just an extract from my dissertation back then. On the next slide, I have a bit more simple one. But the college supplier portfolio matrix really helped with this 2x2 matrix, where you have two parameters on the y and x axis and see, okay, how is this really important for your way, for your strategy, for your purpose, for your company. To make it a bit more practical for you today, so we not look at vitamins. I think it isn't that convenient for the individual one here, but more looking at the next bullet here, as I'm referring to the balance between impact and effort. Now, these are the two parameters that I typically choose because they are practical and you can use them in every scenario almost. But it really comes down to apply to your priorities, and in the end, making, even though that we've made clarity towards what's the question, further extend this clarity path towards your execution as well. Because what you can use this matrix for is that all the answers that you actually have to the question that is really relevant for you, you can actually set it up towards, okay, what is your, how much of a strategic impact does this individual answer have to your question? But as well also, what is the resource required to have it completed? Because thereby you also have the possibility to add the time horizon, could be the cost horizon as well. It could be that if you only have, now I'm just saying something, 1 month or 2 months, then it shouldn't potentially be the longer spent beneficial task that you are working towards, but potentially just the high priority quick wins. So this is really a simple method to make sure that you find the right question, you find the right deliverables. And it could be that there are more ways to actually answer this, but you've chosen this, but you actually make clarity towards your management or towards your audience that you are to present this to, that there are other options as well, but it really just comes down to what kind of scope are we working with. So let's rewind back a bit. Where are we now? And what can we conclude based on this? I think, once again, why do we as professionals forget to apply what we've already learned? I think based off these observations, based of the remedies, based on my experience over the years, I think we can really conclude that when you get a job, you get into the corporate world, there is a tendency to prioritize speed over structure. And as we identified as observation number 3, it isn't always the quickest decisions to make. Learning number 2, really, really important, especially to a lot of all the graduates or the students that we have here today, disconnecting theory from context. When you are in a course today at Brooks, then I know it's easier that you have a case, you have a strategy, the task that you are to work with, so you have the right information about that company that you work with. I know in the real world it can be very difficult to convert the theory into practice. But that's also why that I think it's not important for the good student to remember the full curriculum, but remember the small pieces where it is relevant to apply it into. And it's a task, it's a skill set in itself. But if you already have this in mind, when you go into the real world, it will also work as a reminder to not forget what you fully learned at Brooks, for instance. The last one, it is clear as we have the speed, we stop up and potentially find it difficult to match theory with practice. Then there is also a tendency to stop up and neglect the importance of reflecting. I had a course at Brooks called self-development, and I think that really helped me. At least one thing is to do these profile tests on you as an individual, but it also just give you the insight into how important that sometimes it is to leave your work, go for a walk, and see it with some new lenses, because it could be that you see it in a new view that you didn't do before. If we summarize all this into one, I think it is quite obvious that as individuals, I think it isn't really about what we forget here. I think it's just that we stop to create space for it. In the end, when we give work to consultants and they work on the deliverables that has been agreed, they don't just have an answer straight away. They take time to make sure that their input will be as good as possible, because it will affect the output. A bit equivalent to how we better prompt our ChatGPT or AI frameworks today, that the output is just as good as the input. A bit similar here. If you don't prioritize the time and create space for yourself to reflect and structure this, then you're just doing like anyone else. Finally, I think really just to connect what we've just been through with the title, it is that yes, you can have top marks, you can go out with a distinction, but it is only top talent that keeps the doors open afterwards. In the end, I think self-development, reflection, to have this structure capability, it takes time. But if you create it into a habit in the way that you work, then you cannot else be a success. That's all what I got for you today, and I look forward to dive a bit more into this topic in the questions afterwards. Thank you.